The wind did not just blow in Blackwood. It scoured. It came screaming down from the Medicine Bow Mountains, gathering speed across 50 miles of nothing but sagebrush and frozen iron-hard earth until it slammed into the warped siding of the town. It was late November in the year 1888, and the high plains had already turned into a gray and white purgatory. The sky was too big, a vast, indifferent dome of slate that seemed to press the little cattle town into the mud. Blackwood was not much to look at even in the spring, but in the grip of a hard winter, it looked like a mistake. The main street was a rutted scar of frozen slush, churned up by wagon wheels before the freeze set in, and now solidified into treacherous ridges that could snap a horse's leg. The buildings huddled together as if for warmth, their false fronts leaning against the gale, wood bleached gray by the relentless sun and splintered by the frost. Clara Byrne stood on the back porch of her boarding house, fighting a war with the kitchen door. The wood had swollen with the damp and then frozen solid in the jam. She slammed her shoulder against the frame, her breath puffing out in white clouds that were snatched away instantly by the north wind. She was 26 years old, though the mirror in the hallway told her she looked 30. She wore a heavy wool coat that had once belonged to her husband, the sleeves rolled up to reveal thin, capable wrists, and a pair of fingerless gloves that did little to stop the cold from biting into her knuckles. At her feet sat a wooden crate filled with coal. It was heavy, black, and cost more than she had made in the last 2 weeks combined. With a final, frustrated grunt, she kicked the bottom of the door and shoved. It gave way with a shriek of tearing ice. Clara dragged the crate across the threshold, the rough wood scraping over the floorboards, and kicked the door shut behind her, leaning back against it to slide the bolt home. The kitchen was only marginally warmer than the porch. It smelled of stale coffee, lye soap, and the pervasive damp chill of a house that was too big to heat properly. Clara hauled the crate toward the cast-iron stove, her muscles trembling. She paused to count the lumps of coal, a habit born of necessity. There were perhaps 40 pieces, if she banked the fire low during the day and only fed it fully when the lodgers were eating. She might make it last 10 days, 10 days of warmth, and then what? She rubbed her numb hands together, wincing as the blood began to flow back into her fingers. The silence of the house pressed in on her. It was a large, rambling structure, built during the brief silver boom 10 years prior, before the mines played out and the town shrank back to cattle and bitterness. Now, it was just a shell of echoing rooms. She walked into the front hallway, checking the mail table. Empty. No letters from her sister in St. Louis. No payment from the railroad for the 2 nights the surveyor had stayed last week. Clara caught her reflection in the darkened window of the parlor. Her hair, the color of dried wheat, was pulling loose from its pins. Her face was pale, the skin tight over high cheekbones. She looked like what she was, a woman holding on by her fingernails. The town had names for her. She knew them all. She heard them in the mercantile when the conversation died abruptly as she entered. She heard them in the hiss of whispers between the church matrons when she walked past on Sundays. Head high, looking at the ground. Proud. That was the kindest one. Cold. That was common. Black Widow. That was the one the drunks used. They said she had driven Martin to his grave. They said a woman who kept a boarding house alone, with men coming and going at all hours, had no business calling herself respectable. They said she was too pretty for her own good and too hard for a husband to love. Clara touched the faded wallpaper near the staircase. They did not know about the nights Martin had come home with whiskey on his breath and the devil in his eyes. They did not see the bruises she had covered with high collars and flour powder. They did not know that the night the sheriff came to tell her Martin had been found frozen in a snowdrift outside the saloon. Her first feeling had not been grief. It had been a terrifying, suffocating relief and guilt. God, the guilt. It sat in her chest like a stone. Maybe the town was right. Maybe she was poison. She had failed to save him. She had failed to be the wife he wanted. And now, she was failing to keep the roof over her head. A heavy knock at the front door made her jump. It was a confident, proprietary sound, not the hesitant tap of a traveler looking for a room. Clara smoothed her apron, took a breath to steady her hands, and opened the door. Silas Kincaid stood on the porch, shaking snow from a fur-collared coat that cost more than Clara's entire house. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had weathered into a kind of rugged, predatory handsomeness. He owned the Circle K Ranch, which meant he owned half the valley, the sheriff, and the mortgage on the building Clara stood in. "Evening, Clara," he said. His voice was deep, smooth like polished oak. He did not wait to be invited in. He simply stepped forward, forcing Clara to retreat or be trampled. "Mr. Kincaid," Clara said, keeping her hand on the door. "It is a cold night to be out." "It is that," Silas said. He pulled off his gloves, his eyes sweeping over the hallway, noting the peeling paint and the chill in the air. "I was in town for business. Thought I would check on you. This storm is going to be a bad one." "We are fine, Silas. Thank you." He smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. They were flat and gray, like the winter sky. "Are you? I saw you hauling that coal crate earlier. A woman like you should not be doing steer work. Clara." "The work needs doing," she said stiffly, "and I have no one else to do it." "That is my point," he said softly. He took a step closer, and the smell of him, expensive tobacco, bay rum, and cold air, filled the small space between them. "I stopped by the bank today, Mr. Henderson tells me you are 2 months behind on the note, and there is still the matter of Martin's funeral costs." Clara felt the heat rise in her neck. "I have a payment for Mr. Henderson on Friday. I have a boarder, a school teacher, and I have taken in sewing for Mrs. Miller." "Sewing," Silas chuckled darkly. "Stitching hems for pennies while your hands freeze. Clara, be reasonable. You are drowning here." "I am managing." "You are starving," he corrected. His voice dropped, becoming intimate, cloying. "I have told you before. Clara, I can make this go away. The debt, the struggle. Martin made a mess of things, but you do not have to pay for his mistakes forever." Clara stiffened. She knew what was coming. He had danced around it for months, ever since Martin was put in the ground. "I can help you," Silas said, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Clara flinched, pulling back, but he didn't withdraw his hand. "Come out to the ranch. I need a housekeeper, a companion. You would be warm, you would be safe. And this house, well, the bank can take it, and you would be free of it." It sounded like a job offer, but Clara knew the currency Silas Kincaid traded in. A housekeeper did not wear silk, which was what he had tried to gift her last Christmas. A housekeeper was not looked at the way he was looking at her now, like a prize filly he had already decided to buy. "I am not looking for a position, Silas," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts. "This is my home. It is all I have." Silas's face hardened. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the iron beneath. "It is only your home as long as I allow the bank to wait. Clara, do not forget that." "I will have the money," she whispered. "Winter is just starting," Silas said. He pulled his gloves back on, slow and deliberate. "It is going to be a long, cold season. When you get tired of shivering in the dark, you send word to me. But do not wait too long. I am not a patient man." He turned and walked out into the swirling snow, not bothering to close the door behind him. Clara rushed to slam it shut, throwing the bolt as if to physically bar his words from the house. She leaned her forehead against the wood, her eyes burning. He was right. That was the terror of it. He was right. She was drowning. The coal would last 10 days. The flour in the pantry was low. The roof over the east room leaked every time the snow melted. She walked into the kitchen and sat on a 3-legged stool near the stove, wrapping her arms around herself. The house felt vast and empty, a hollow throat waiting to swallow her. If the winter got worse, and it always did, she would have to choose: starve, freeze, or sell the only thing she had left: herself. Outside, the darkness had become absolute. The wind howled like a wounded animal. driving snow in horizontal sheets that stung the eyes and numbed the skin. 3 miles out of town, a solitary figure rode through the whiteout. Eli Cade was half frozen. He could not feel his feet in his stirrups, and his hands were curled into claws inside his gloves. The reins wrapped around his wrists because he no longer had the grip strength to hold them. His horse, a big raw-boned bay gelding named Whiskey, stumbled through a drift that reached his chest, snorting in exhaustion. "Easy, boy," Eli rasped. His voice was a wreck, unused for days and roughened by the dry cold. "Easy now." Eli was 34 years old, but in the dark and the snow, he felt 100. He wore a canvas coat that was torn at the shoulder, the result of a tangle with barbed wire 3 days back, and a hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much of the worst parts of men. A scar ran from his left ear down to his jawline, a pale, jagged line that disappeared into the collar of his coat. He had been riding for weeks, moving north, always north, away from the border, away from the heat, away from the memories of the things he had done in the name of a paycheck. He was tired. It was a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the ride. It was the weight of the colt on his hip, the weight of the ghosts that rode pillion behind him. The lights of Blackwood appeared as faint, yellow smudges in the swirling gray. Eli let out a breath that rattled in his chest. Civilization? Or close enough. Whiskey plodded onto the main street, his hooves sliding on the icy ruts. The town was shuttered tight. No one was foolish enough to be out in this. Except Eli. He saw the glow of a saloon sign, the Lucky Ace, and the urge to go inside, to pour fire down his throat until the shivering stopped, was strong. But he had $4.12 in his pocket. Whiskey needed grain and a stall more than Eli needed a drink. He saw a boy, perhaps 12 years old, bundled in rags, hurrying from a woodshed to the back of a store. "Hey!" Eli called out. The sound was swallowed by the wind. He tried again, louder. "Boy!" The kid stopped, looking up at the horse and rider with wide, frightened eyes. "Where can a man get a cheap bed?" Eli asked. "And a stall for the horse?" The boy pointed a shaking finger down the street, toward a large, 2-story house that looked like it was leaning slightly to the left. "Widow Burns' place," the boy yelled over the wind. "End of the street. She is cheap, but she is strict." "Obliged," Eli muttered. He urged the horse forward. The house loomed up out of the dark. Dark, except for a faint light in a downstairs window. It looked tired. It looked broken. Eli felt a kinship with it immediately. He dismounted, his left knee buckling as his weight hit the ground. He grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling, gritting his teeth until the white-hot spike of pain faded to a dull throb. War wound, souvenir from a skirmish near the Rio Grande. It hated the cold. He led the horse to the hitching rail, tied him loosely, and limped up the steps to the front door. He hesitated before knocking. He looked down at himself, mud spattered, blood on his coat from a rabbit he had skinned 2 days ago, a face covered in uneven stubble. He looked like trouble. He knocked anyway. He did not have a choice. Inside, Clara was just blowing out the lamp in the kitchen when the knock came. It was different from Silas's. This was a heavy, dull thud, barely audible over the wind. She froze. It was past 8 o'clock. No honest visitor came at this hour in a blizzard. She went to the hallway, picking up the heavy iron poker from the fireplace as she passed. She held it behind the folds of her skirt. She unlocked the door and cracked it open 3 inches. Peering out, a man stood there. He was tall, but he was stooped, his shoulders hunched against the gale. The light from the hallway spilled onto his face, illuminating hollow cheeks, wind-burned skin that was cracked and peeling, and eyes that were so dark they looked like holes in the world. Clara's instinct screamed at her to slam the door. This was a drifter, a saddle tramp. The kind of man Silas warned her about, the kind of man the town whispered she entertained. He looked dangerous. There was a gun on his hip, tied down low. "No rooms," she said sharply. "Try the hotel." The man didn't move. He just looked at her, and Clara saw something that stopped her from closing the door. It wasn't aggression. It was exhaustion. Pure, unadulterated exhaustion. "Hotel cost $2, the man said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "I do not have $2 for a room. I am not a charity, mister. I have got $4 total," he said. "Need to stable my horse. Need to eat. I will give you 50 cents for a corner. Floor will do. And I will work." Clara hesitated. 50 cents. It would buy milk and eggs. "What kind of work?" she asked, her grip tightening on the poker. "Anything," he said. He shifted his weight, and she saw him wince. "Chop wood. Fix fences. Shovel snow. I am handy with tools." The wind gusted, ripping the door from Clara's hand and slamming it against the inside wall. Snow swirled into the hallway. The man stood there, swaying slightly, the snow settling on his shoulders. He looked like he might simply tip over and die right there on her porch. Clara looked at his hands. They were big, gloveless, and red with cold. But she saw the thick calluses on the palms and fingers. Working hands, cowboy hands, not a thief's hands. She looked at his face again. There was a scar running down his neck, ugly and old, but in his eyes, she saw a terrible kind of shame. He was begging, and he hated it. "I have an attic room," Clara said, her voice softer than she intended. "It is unheated. The roof leaks in the corner if the snow melts too fast. The bed is narrow." "Sounds like a palace, ma'am," he whispered. 75 cents a night, she said, testing him. "And you shovel the walk in the morning." "I will give you 50 cents, and I will fix that step I almost tripped on," he countered. "And I will shovel." Clara stared at him. He was barely standing, yet he was bargaining. It showed a spark of life she hadn't expected. 50 cents, she agreed. "And you do the work before breakfast. Stable is round back for your horse. There is hay, but you will have to break the ice on the trough yourself." "Yes, ma'am. My name is Mrs. Byrne," she said, stepping back to let him in. "Not ma'am. Eli," he said. He stepped over the threshold, bringing the cold in with him. Eli Cade. He smelled of wet wool, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of ozone. As he walked past her, Clara felt the sheer size of him. He was lean, stripped of any softness by hard living, but there was a density to him. "This way," she said, moving toward the stairs. "Boots off at the landing. I just scrubbed these floors." Eli bent to unfasten his spurs, his fingers clumsy with the cold. He set them by the door, then his boots. He walked in his stocking feet, and Clara noticed the socks were darned with 3 different colors of thread. She led him up the stairs. The staircase was narrow and dark, the only light coming from the lamp she held high. The boards groaned under their weight. Halfway up, Eli stumbled. His hand shot out, bracing against the wall with a heavy thud. Clara turned, lifting the lamp. "Are you drunk, Mr. Cade?" "No," he grunted, straightening up. He took a breath, his face pale. "Slipped, that is all." She lowered the lamp, her gaze traveling down to his left leg. He was not putting his full weight on it. "You are hurt." "I am fine," he said, his voice hard. "Just the cold. Old stiffness." He was lying. She could see the pain etched in the tight lines around his mouth, but she also saw the pride there, a brittle, defensive wall that warned her not to push. She knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror often enough. "The room is at the top," she said, turning back around. "Third door on the left." The attic room was freezing. The air inside was stagnant and sharp. There was a single iron bed frame with a thin mattress, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, and a small window that rattled in its frame. "Here," Clara said, setting the lamp on the washstand. "I will bring you a blanket. We serve breakfast at 6. If you are not down by 6:30, you do not eat." "I will be up," Eli said. He stood in the center of the room, looking at the bed as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. Clara went to the linen closet in the hallway and pulled out a quilt. It was thin, the batting worn down over years of use, but it was all she had to spare. She returned to the room and handed it to him. "Thank you, Mrs. Byrne," he said. "Sleep well, Mr. Cade." She closed the door and walked down the stairs. her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She locked the front door, checked the stove one last time, and went to her own room on the ground floor. It was a cold night. She undressed quickly, shivering, and pulled on her flannel nightgown. She climbed into her bed, piling 3 quilts on top of herself, and blew out the candle. The darkness rushed in. Clara lay on her back, staring up at the invisible ceiling. The wind battered the house, making the timbers groan above her. She heard the floorboards creak as the stranger, Eli, moved across the room. She heard the squeak of the bed springs as he sat down. And then she heard the coughing. It was a deep, wet sound, muffled by the floorboards but distinct in the silence of the house. He coughed for a long time, a jagged, hacking rhythm that sounded painful. Then silence. Then another bout. Clara pulled the quilt up to her chin. She was alone in a house that was falling apart, with a town that hated her outside the walls and a dangerous man with a gun sleeping above her head. She should be terrified. She should be planning how to get him out first thing in the morning. But as she listened to the stranger coughing in the dark, fighting for air in the freezing attic, she didn't feel fear. She felt a profound, aching heaviness. He was up there, cold and hurting. She was down here, cold and scared. There was only a layer of wood and plaster between them, but they might as well have been on different planets. "God help us," she whispered into the darkness. The wind howled its answer, lonely and wild, and Clara closed her eyes, waiting for a sleep that she knew would be a long time coming. Dawn did not break over Blackwood so much as the darkness simply bruised into a sullen, iron-gray twilight. The wind had died down in the night, leaving a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against the frosted window panes of the boarding house. Clara Byrne woke to a sound that was not the wind. It was a rhythmic, dull thudding, a steady percussion that vibrated through the floorboards and up the leg of her bed. Thwack, crack, thwack, crack. She lay still for a moment, the heavy quilts pulled up to her nose, her breath misting in the frigid air of her bedroom. The fire in the stove had long since burned down to ash. The house was freezing. Then she remembered. The cowboy. The attic. She pushed the covers back and swung her legs out, gasping as her bare feet hit the icy floorboards. She dressed quickly, shivering violently as she pulled on her wool stockings and the heavy gray dress she wore for housework. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and hurried to the kitchen. The stove was cold. She reached for the scuttle to start the fire, but it was already full. Not just full, but brimming with fresh kindling and dark, shiny lumps of coal. Clara paused, her hand hovering over the iron latch. She moved to the window and scraped a small circle in the frost. In the backyard, knee-deep in a drift of fresh snow, Eli Cade was swinging an axe. He had stripped off his heavy canvas coat, working only in a flannel shirt and a sheepskin vest. His breath puffed out in white clouds, rhythmic as a steam engine. He moved with a terrifying efficiency. He did not hack at the wood. He dismantled it. He set a log, swung, and split it clean, the two halves falling away as if they had simply decided to separate. He had already cleared a path from the back door to the woodshed and another to the privy. The wood pile, which had been a disorganized heap of uncut logs yesterday, was now a neat, towering stack of split firewood. Clara watched him for a long moment. He was favoring his left leg. She could see that clearly now. Every time he planted his feet to swing, there was a minute hesitation, a grimace that tightened the corner of his mouth before the axe came down. But he did not stop. He was paying for his 50-cent room before he had even eaten a crumb of her bread. She turned back to the stove, striking a match with a trembling hand. She felt a strange, tight knot in her chest loosen just a fraction. For the first time in 2 years, she did not have to go out into the biting cold to chop the morning wood. By the time Eli came into the kitchen, stomping the snow off his boots on the mat, the coffee was boiling and the smell of toasted bread filled the room. He stood in the doorway, bringing the cold in with him again. His face was red from the exertion, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the freezing temperature. "Morning, Mrs. Byrne," he said. his voice rough with sleep and disuse. "Mr. Cade," Clara said, not turning from the stove. "There is coffee." "It is weak, I am afraid. The beans have to last until Friday." "Coffee is coffee," he said. He moved to the table and sat down, moving stiffly. Clara set a plate before him. 2 slices of bread, toasted on the stovetop to hide their staleness, and a small scraping of lard. It was a poor breakfast for a working man, and she felt a flush of shame heat her neck. "I am sorry there are no eggs," she said stiffly. "The hen stopped laying when the freeze set in." Eli looked at the bread, then up at her. His eyes were dark and guarded, but there was no judgment in them. "This is fine, ma'am, more than I expected. You did a lot of work out there," she said, pouring herself a cup and leaning against the counter. She did not sit. "More than 50 cents worth." "I like to earn my keep," Eli said. He took a sip of the coffee, and she saw him suppress a wince. It was barely brown water, and the cold helps the leg, keeps the swelling down. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The cold was agony for old injuries, but Clara nodded, accepting the fiction. "Thank you," she said. Eli paused with the bread halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a kind of startled confusion. He looked like a dog that had been kicked so many times it no longer knew how to react to an open hand. "You are welcome," he murmured, and dropped his gaze to the table. They ate in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the whistle of the wind picking up outside. It was an awkward, jagged silence, filled with the things they were not saying. Clara wanted to ask him where he had come from, why he was running, why a man with eyes that old was drifting alone in winter. Eli wanted to ask her why a woman with a face like hers was living in a wreck of a house, fighting a town that seemed to want her dead. Neither spoke. After breakfast, Eli did not leave. He did not go to the saloon, and he did not retreat to his freezing attic. He asked Clara for a hammer and a handful of nails. "The shutter in the front parlor bangs," he said. "Kept me up. Figure I might as well fix it." "You do not have to do that," Clara said. "I need something to do with my hands." "Mrs. Byrne," he said quietly. "If I sit still, I get stiff." For the rest of the day, the boarding house was filled with the sounds of industry. Eli moved through the rooms like a ghost, fixing the things that had been broken for months. He planed the bottom of the sticking kitchen door until it swung silent and true. He climbed onto the porch roof, despite the ice, and patched the leak that had been staining the wallpaper in the east hallway. He sat on the stairs for an hour, sanding the splintered banister smooth with a piece of pumice stone he had found in his saddlebags. Clara went about her chores, changing sheets, sweeping, darning socks, but she was acutely aware of him. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He worked with a focused intensity, as if every nail driven straight was a small victory against a chaotic world. She felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, but also a prickly unease. This was her house. It was her fortress against the world, having this stranger here, touching her walls, fixing her broken things. Felt intimate in a way that made her skin prickle. It was as if by repairing the house, he was seeing all the ways she had failed to keep it together. But Eli was not thinking about Clara's failures. As he rhythmically moved the sandpaper over the wood, his mind was miles away and years in the past. The repetitive motion was a trance. It allowed the memories to slip past his guard. Flash, the smell of black powder and burning thatch. Texas, 1878. The heat was suffocating. He was riding with Silas Kincaid's regulators. Though they called themselves deputies then, they were clearing squatters off the range. That was the legal term. Clearing, as if people were brushed to be burned. He remembered the weight of the torch in his hand. He remembered Kincaid's voice, laughing, shouting over the roar of the fire. "Burn it out! Eli, flush them like rats!" He remembered the woman running from the cabin, screaming in Spanish, clutching a bundle of blankets. And he remembered the child, a boy, no older than 7, standing in the dust, staring at Eli. The boy did not cry. He just looked at Eli with eyes that were ancient and dead, eyes that said, "I see you, I see what you are." Eli's hand slipped on the banister, the rough stone biting into his palm. He stopped, breathing hard, staring at the grain of the wood. He had left the next day. He had ridden away in the middle of the night, leaving his back wages and his reputation behind. But he had not been able to outride the look in that boy's eyes. It was waiting for him in every bottle of whiskey, in every dark room, in the silence of the snow-covered plains. "Mr. Cade?" Clara's voice snapped him back. He looked up, his heart hammering against his ribs. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, a basket of laundry in her arms. She was looking at him with concern. "You have been sanding that same spot for 10 minutes, she said softly. "You will go right through the wood." Eli looked down. He had worn a pale, raw patch into the dark varnish. "Sorry," he grunted, standing up abruptly. "Mind wandered. There is coffee on the stove if you want to warm up," she said, and then she moved past him, the smell of lavender and lye soap trailing in her wake. Eli watched her go, the shame burning in his gut hotter than the whiskey ever had. By mid-afternoon, the other lodgers began to stir. The boarding house was not full, but it was not empty. There was Mr. Daly, a railroad foreman who had come down with a chest fever 2 weeks ago and had been left behind by his crew to recover or die. He was a pale, sweating man who lived in the back room and coughed almost as much as Eli did. There was Mr. Finch, a traveling peddler who sold patent medicines and ribbons. He was a small, ferret-faced man with shifty eyes who paid his rent to the penny but never looked Clara in the face. And there was Miss Perkins, a spinster schoolteacher who had retired to the high country for her health. She was bird-like and critical, treating the boarding house like a personal affront that she was forced to endure. Clara tended to them with a competence that bordered on military. She brought Mr. Daly willow-bark tea and changed his sweat-soaked sheets. She listened to Mr. Finch complain about the draft in his room, nodding politely, while knowing full well he had left his window cracked to smoke tobacco. She endured Miss Perkins's lectures on the dust in the parlor. Eli watched this dynamic from the periphery. He was invisible to them, a servant or a fixture, until they noticed the gun on his hip or the scar on his neck. Then he became a threat. But what he noticed most was how they treated Clara. They needed her. Mr. Daly would be dead without her nursing. Miss Perkins would freeze without Clara's fire. Yet there was a distance, a coldness in their manner. They took the tea, they took the heat, but they held themselves apart, as if Clara had a disease they were afraid to catch. "She is a widow," Eli thought, watching Miss Perkins sniff disdainfully as Clara swept the hallway. And in a town like this, a woman alone is a target. If they treat her nice, they might have to defend her. And nobody wants to defend the outcast. He recognized it because he had lived it. "I'm going to the mercantile," Clara announced around 3 o'clock, wrapping her heavy shawl tight. "Mr. Daly needs more laudanum, and we are out of flour." "I can go," Eli offered from where he was fixing a loose hinge on the pantry door. "No," Clara said, too quickly. "Thank you, but I have to do it." She did not say that she was afraid if he went. The town would think she was keeping a hired gun. She did not say that she was afraid he would not come back. The walk to the general store was a gauntlet. The wind had picked up again, whipping snow into her face, but the cold was easier to bear than the eyes. When Clara pushed open the door of Higgins's general store, the warm air and the smell of spices and tobacco hit her. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully. The conversation in the store stopped dead. Silas Kincaid was not there, but his shadow was. 2 of his ranch hands were leaning against the counter, chewing tobacco. Mrs. Gable, the mayor's wife, was inspecting a bolt of calico. Mr. Higgins stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. "Mrs. Byrne," Higgins said. His voice was flat. "Mr. Higgins," Clara said, keeping her chin up. She moved to the counter. ignoring the ranch hands who were staring openly at her. "I need 5 pounds of flour, a tin of coffee, and a bottle of Dr. Bell's tonic." "That puts you another $1 deep on your credit." "Clara," Higgins said loudly. "Mrs." Gable turned, her eyebrows arching. "I will pay it on Friday," Clara said, her voice steady. "Add a pouch of tobacco to that, please." The silence in the room deepened. Clara did not smoke. "Tobacco?" one of the ranch hands drawled. He was a thin man with a wandering eye. "Did not know you took up the pipe. Widow." "It is for a guest," Clara said, staring straight ahead. "Guest." The man snorted. "Is that what we are calling them now? Heard you took in a stray, some crippled drifter." "He is a boarder," Clara said, her knuckles white where she gripped her purse. "Same as the others. Boarders usually pay cash." "Mrs." Gable murmured to the bolt of cloth. "They do not usually work it off in trade." The implication hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the flour in their faces. She wanted to tell them that the crippled drifter had done more work in 6 hours than any of them had done all winter. But she could not. She needed the credit. She needed the food. "Just the goods. Please, Mr. Higgins," she whispered. She walked back to the boarding house with the heavy sack of flour digging into her arms, the wind drying the tears of humiliation on her cheeks before they could fall. She repeated the words in her head like a mantra. "I do not owe them. I do not owe them anything. My conscience is clean." But as she stepped onto her porch, seeing the smoke curling from the chimney, smoke from wood Eli had chopped, she felt a crack in her armor. She was so tired of being strong. That evening, the wind turned into a gale. The house shook, the timbers groaning in protest. In the back room, Mr. Daly's fever spiked. Clara could hear him thrashing from the kitchen. She grabbed the bottle of tonic and a basin of water and ran to his room. Mr. Daly was delirious. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide and unseeing, shouting at invisible demons. He was a big man, heavy with muscle from years of laying track, and in his fever, he was terrified. "No, the train! Stop the train!" he screamed, flailing his arms. He knocked the basin from Clara's hands, sending water splashing across the floor. "Mr. Daly, please!" Clara cried, trying to push him back onto the pillows. He was burning up, his skin radiating heat, but he was strong. He shoved her back, and Clara stumbled, hitting her hip against the dresser. Suddenly, Eli was there. He moved past her, not frantic, but calm. He stepped up to the bed and caught Mr. Daly's flailing wrists. "Easy, partner," Eli said. His voice was a low rumble, cutting through the man's panic. "Easy now. The train is stopped. You are safe." "The brakes failed," Daly shouted, struggling. "I set the brakes myself," Eli lied, his voice steady as a rock. He pressed Daly back against the mattress. He did not use violence. He used leverage and a steady, unyielding pressure. "It is holding. Lie back." "Clara," Eli said over his shoulder, not looking away from the sick man. "Get the medicine. I will hold him." Clara scrambled for the bottle. Her hands were shaking. She uncorked it and moved to the other side of the bed. "Open up. Daly," Eli commanded softly. He shifted his grip, holding the man's head steady with one hand while keeping his body pinned with the other. Clara poured the bitter brown liquid into the spoon and brought it to Daly's lips. He gagged, turning his head, but Eli held him firm. "Drink it," Eli said. Daly swallowed. Then he coughed, his body arching off the bed. Clara reached out to steady his shoulder at the same moment Eli shifted his grip. Her hand landed on top of Eli's. For a second, everything stopped. His hand was rough, scarred, and incredibly warm. Hers was small and pale against his weathered skin. She could feel the tension in his tendons, the sheer, leashed power he was holding back. She looked up. Eli was looking at her. His eyes were inches away across the sick man's heaving chest. In that chaotic, fever-smelling room, a jolt of awareness arcade between them that was shocking in its intensity. It was not just gratitude. It was recognition. "You are fighting too," his eyes said. "Just like me." Daly slumped back, the medicine taking hold. The moment broke. Clara pulled her hand away as if she had been burned. He should sleep now, she stammered. I will stay with him for a bit, Eli said, stepping back. He looked shaken too. He wiped his hands on his pants, looking anywhere but at her. Make sure he does not hurt himself. Thank you, Eli, she whispered. It was the first time she had used his first name. It was near midnight when Clara went upstairs. The house was quiet again, save for the wind. Mr. Daly was sleeping peacefully, his fever broken. Clara stood in the hallway, holding a thick wool blanket. It was her own spare, taken from the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. She told herself it was just practical. If he froze to death in her attic, it would be bad for business. She climbed the narrow stairs. The attic door was closed. She knocked softly. Come in. She pushed the door open. The room was freezing. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Eli was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, still fully dressed, hunched over his knees. He had not lit the lamp. The only light came from the moonlight reflecting off the snow outside the window. He looked up. He looked small in the dark, stripped of the competence he had shown all day. He looked like a man who was slowly freezing to death and had accepted it. I brought you another blanket, Clara said, stepping into the room. It is going to be a hard night. Eli stood up. He moved slowly, his left leg stiffening in the cold. You did not have to do that. Take it, she said, holding it out. He reached for it. His fingers were like ice. As he took the heavy wool, his hand brushed hers. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact was electric. In the freezing room, the warmth of another human being felt like a miracle. Clara looked at his face, illuminated by the pale moonlight. She saw the exhaustion, the loneliness. She saw the gun belt hanging on the bedpost. The only thing he seemed to trust. You have worked these lands before, she said. It wasn't a question. You know how to fix a high country roof? You know how to calm a track layer? Eli stiffened. He gripped the blanket tighter. I have been around. Who did you ride for? She asked softly. Eli's jaw tightened. The name was on the tip of his tongue. Kincaid. I rode for Silas Kincaid. I burned houses for him. I stole cattle for him. I am the reason you are scared of men like me. He looked at her. He saw the shadow of fear that always lived in her eyes, the fear of the powerful men who controlled her world. If he said that name, if he told her he was one of Kincaid's wolves, she would throw him out, or worse, she would look at him the way the child had looked at him. He could not bear that. Not tonight, not when she had just brought him a blanket. Does not matter, Eli said, his voice rough. Long time ago. I am not that man anymore. Clara searched his face. She knew he was holding something back. But she also knew that everyone in this house was running from something. Good night, Eli, she said. Night, Clara. The days began to blur into a pattern, a quiet rhythm born of survival. November bled into December. The snow piled higher against the windows, turning the world into a tunnel of white. Clara cooked. Eli worked. He fixed the woodshed roof. He rebuilt the chicken coop, insulating it with straw so the hens started laying again. He fixed the leg of the dining room table that had wobbled for 3 years. They ate their meals together in the kitchen, before the other lodgers were up or after they had gone to bed. The silence between them began to thaw. That Mrs. Gable, Eli said one evening, peeling a potato with his belt knife. She looks like she swallowed a lemon and is afraid to let it pass. Clara laughed. It was a rusty sound, surprising her. She is the head of the Temperance League. I think smiling is against the bylaws. Shame, Eli drawled. Life is short enough without being miserable on purpose. Are you miserable, Eli? She asked, stirring the stew. Eli looked at the potato paring curling over his thumb. I am warm, I am fed, and the roof does not leak anymore. I have been worse. It was a small admission, but it felt like a victory. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with a growing familiarity. She knew how he took his coffee, black, no sugar. He knew that she hummed when she was kneading dough. They were two lonely people circling the same fire, terrified of the heat but desperate for it. Then came the night of the burn. It was a Tuesday, a week before Christmas. The kitchen was hot, the stove roaring. Clara was rushing to get dinner ready for the lodgers. She reached for the heavy cast-iron pot of boiling potatoes, her mind on the grocery bill. The potholder slipped, her bare skin seared against the hot iron handle. "Ah!" Clara cried out, dropping the pot. It clanged onto the stovetop, boiling water splashing. She clutched her hand to her chest, tears springing to her eyes instantly. The pain was sharp and blinding. Eli was there in a second. He didn't ask what happened. He grabbed her shoulder, turning her toward the sink. "Hand!" he commanded. Clara held out her trembling hand. An angry red welt was already rising across her palm and fingers. Eli pumped the handle of the sink furiously until the water gushed out, freezing cold from the deep well. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but gentle, and thrust her hand under the icy stream. "Keep it there," he said. The shock of the cold water against the burn made her gasp. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the cool metal of the pump. Eyes closed. Eli stood behind her. He did not move away. He held her wrist, keeping it under the water. Clara could feel the heat of his body radiating against her back. He was so close. If she leaned back an inch, she would be resting against his chest. The pain in her hand began to dull, replaced by a different kind of sensation. Eli's thumb was moving. Unconsciously, he was stroking the sensitive skin on the inside of her wrist. A slow, rhythmic caress. Clara's breath hitched. The kitchen seemed to shrink. The sound of the water was a roar in her ears. She could hear his breathing, steady and deep, right at her ear. She could smell the scent of him, wood smoke, soap, and man. It was terrifying. It was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her since Martin died. It was a want so sudden and sharp, it made her knees weak. She turned her head slightly. Eli was looking down at her hand, his expression intense, his lips parted. He seemed mesmerized by the pale skin of her wrist against his rough fingers. He shifted. His other hand came up, hovering near her waist, as if he wanted to pull her back against him. Clara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Yes," a voice inside her whispered. "Please, no!" screamed the fear. "Ruin, danger, loss." She yanked her hand back from the water, pulling away from him as if he were the one burning her. "It is fine," she gasped, backing up until her hip hit the table. She cradled her wet hand against her chest, her eyes wide. It is better now. Thank you." Eli stood by the sink, his hand still suspended in the air where her wrist had been. He looked dazed. He blinked, the mask of the stoic cowboy sliding back into place, but not before she saw the raw hunger beneath it. "Keep it cold," he said, his voice thick, "or it will blister." "I will," she whispered. He stared at her for 1 second longer, a look that stripped away the wool and the walls and saw the lonely, frightened woman underneath. Then he turned and walked out the back door, into the snow and the dark, leaving Clara trembling in the warm kitchen, her burned hand throbbing in time with her heart. January bled into February, and the high plains ceased to be a landscape and became a prison. The snow did not fall in soft flakes anymore. It came down as hard little pellets of ice that stung exposed skin like birdshot. The drifts along the north side of the boarding house reached the second-story windows, banking the structure in white silence. The town of Blackwood huddled in on itself. Tempers shortened with the days. Men argued over card games that would have been friendly in July, and dogs snapped at their masters' heels. The supply wagons from the south had not been able to break through the pass for 3 weeks, and the shelves at Higgins's general store were looking like a smile with missing teeth. To make matters worse, word came down from the high pastures that the Circle K had lost 20 head of cattle. The carcasses had been found stripped, not by wolves, but by men. Rustlers. Silas Kincaid was a man who took theft as a personal insult, and his mood darkened the town like a thunderhead. He rode through the streets with his men, looking at every stranger, every drifter, as if measuring them for a rope. On the second Sunday of the month, the church bell tolled with a flat, dull sound in the freezing air. Clara Byrne walked to the service alone. She wore her best black dress, though the hem was frayed and damp from the snow, and a bonnet that had seen better years. She slipped into the back pew just as the Reverend Thomas began the hymn. She kept her head down, clutching her hymnal like a shield. She could feel the heat of the stairs on the back of her neck. They pricked at her skin. The town was small, and there were no secrets, only rumors that grew teeth. They knew she had a man living in her house, a man who was not kin, a man who chopped her wood and fixed her roof and walked with a gun on his hip. When the service ended, Clara tried to slip away before the social hour began, but the aisle was blocked. Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Miller, two ranch wives wrapped in enough fur to smother a bear, stood between Clara and the door. "Mrs. Byrne." "Mrs." Gable said. Her voice was sweet, the kind of sweetness that masks the taste of poison. "We were just praying for you." "Thank you," Clara said, keeping her eyes on the door. "I must get back. The stove needs tending." "I imagine it does," Mrs. Miller said, her thin lips twitching. "It must take a lot of heat to keep that big house warm, especially with guests." "Mr. Cade is a boarder," Clara said, the rehearsed line tasting like ash in her mouth. "He pays for his room." "Does he?" Mrs. Gable tilted her head. "We heard he pays in trade. That is a dangerous arrangement for a woman alone." "Clara, Scripture says we must avoid the very appearance of evil. And having a rough man like that, a man with no history, sleeping under your roof, well, it invites trouble. It invites judgment." "I run a business, Mrs. Gable," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Not a convent. Good day." She pushed past them, stepping out into the blinding white of the afternoon. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt dirty, though she had done nothing wrong. Across the street, leaning against the rough wood of the livery stable, Eli Cade watched. He had not gone inside. He never did. He stood with his collar turned up against the wind, his hat pulled low. He saw the way the women cornered her. He saw the stiffness in Clara's spine and the flush on her pale cheeks when she emerged. He took a step forward, his hand dropping unconsciously to his side. Before he caught himself, he had no standing here. If he walked over there and took her arm, if he glared those biddies into silence, he would only prove them right. He would brand Clara as his woman, and in this town, that was a mark of shame. He ground his teeth together, the muscles in his jaw jumping, and forced himself to stay put. He hated this town. He hated the smallness of it, but mostly, he hated that he was the reason she was suffering. Later that afternoon, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. Eli walked to the saloon, not to drink, but to hear the news of the road. He needed to know if the pass was clearing. He was stepping off the boardwalk when a voice stopped him. "You have got a limp, Saint. Did not have that in Abilene." Eli froze. The wind whipped around him, but the cold that settled in his gut had nothing to do with the weather. He knew that voice. It was deep, polished, and carried the weight of a man who was used to being obeyed. He turned slowly. Silas Kincaid stood near the trough, flanked by two of his riders. Kincaid looked immaculate, his coat brushed, his boots shining despite the slush. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and hard. "Hello, Silas," Eli said. He kept his hands away from his coat, open and visible. "It has been a long time," Kincaid said, stepping closer. "I heard there was a stray dog sniffing around the widow's place. Imagine my surprise when I hear the description. Scar on the neck, quiet, handy with a knife." I said to myself, "That sounds like Eli Cade. That sounds like the saint." "Do not call me that," Eli said softly. "Why not?" Kincaid chuckled. "You were the best I ever had. Eli, you did the Lord's work, clearing the chaff, burning out the weeds." "I was a kid," Eli said. "And I was wrong." "You were effective," Kincaid corrected. He took a cigar from his pocket and lit it. the flame flaring briefly against the gray light. "I have missed you. Eli, I have got a problem with rustlers. I need men who know how to track, men who know how to handle things without bringing the sheriff into it. I am done with that work. Silas." "Are you?" Kincaid blew a stream of smoke into the air. "Because I look at you, and I see a man with holes in his boots and a price on his head in Texas. I know about the bank in San Antonio. Eli. I know who rode point on that job." Eli went very still. "That was not me. I was gone by then." "Does not matter what is true," Kincaid murmured. "Matters what I tell the sheriff. Matters what a telegram down south might bring up." He stepped in close, invading Eli's space. "You work for me again. A few nights. Find these thieves. Deal with them. You do that, and maybe I forget I saw you. Maybe I even knock a few $100s off the widow's debt." Eli looked at the wealthy rancher. He felt the old rage uncoiling in his belly. A black snake waking up. It would be so easy. Just a few nights of violence, a few bullets, and he could buy Clara some breathing room. He could pay for his sins with fresh blood. But then he thought of Clara's hand on the pump handle. He thought of the way she hummed in the kitchen. "No," Eli said. Kincaid's smile vanished. The temperature between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are making a mistake," Kincaid said softly. "Men who walk away from me usually end up feeding the coyotes. Eli, and that woman, she is hanging by a thread. She is in no position to turn away my generosity, and neither are you." "Leave her out of it," Eli warned, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. "She is already in it," Kincaid said, turning his back. "She just does not know how deep yet." The sun went down, but the wind did not die. It rose to a shriek. Inside the boarding house, the lamps were lit, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The few remaining lodgers, Mr. Finch and the schoolteacher, had retired early, barricading themselves against the draft. Clara was in the kitchen, banking the stove for the night, when the front door burst open. The crash echoed through the house like a gunshot. Clara dropped the scuttle, coal spilling across the floor, and grabbed the lamp. She rushed into the hallway, her heart in her throat. Silas Kincaid stood in the foyer. He was swaying slightly, his face flushed with whiskey and the cold. Behind him were two of his men, grinning stupidly, snow melting on their shoulders. "Evening, Clara," Kincaid bellowed. "It is too cold for a ride home. We need rooms, and we need a bottle." Clara stood at the base of the stairs, holding the lamp high. Her hand trembled, sending the light shivering across the peeling wallpaper. "The house is full, Mr. Kincaid," she said, her voice tight. "And you know the rules. No spirits in the parlor?" "Rules," Kincaid sneered, kicking the door shut with his heel. "I own the roof. Clara, I make the rules." He walked toward her. He was big, and the smell of whiskey rolling off him was overpowering. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her with a hunger that made Clara's skin crawl. "You look pretty tonight," he slurped. He reached out, his gloved hand catching a loose tendril of her hair. "Too pretty to be sleeping alone in this icebox." "Take your hand off me," Clara whispered, shrinking back against the newel post. "Or what?" Kincaid laughed. "You will sew me to death? Come on, Clara, stop playing the grieving widow. We both know you need a man to take care of. Get out!" The voice came from the top of the stairs. It was not loud, but it cut through the drunken haze of the foyer like a razor blade. Kincaid looked up. Eli stood on the landing. He was not wearing his coat. He wore a simple flannel shirt and his trousers, but the gun belt was strapped around his waist, the leather worn and dark. He stood with his weight on his good leg, his right hand hanging loose by his thigh, inches from the butt of the Colt. Well, Kincaid drawled, though he took a half-step back. "The yard dog barks." "She said the house is full," Eli said. He walked down the stairs. He moved slowly, deliberately. Every step was a calculation. He did not look at the other two men. He looked only at Kincaid. "This is business between me and my tenant. Boy." Kincaid spat. "It is 11 o'clock at night," Eli said, stopping on the bottom step. He placed himself physically between Clara and Kincaid. He did not touch his gun, but the threat was there, vibrating in the air. "That is not business. That is trespassing." The two men behind Kincaid bristled, their hands moving to their coats. "Easy," Eli said. He didn't look at them. "You boys want to die for a drunk man's pride? Not in this hallway. Too narrow. You will hit each other." Kincaid's face turned a mottled purple. He looked at Eli, then at Clara, who was pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "You think you are saving her?" Kincaid hissed at Eli. "You are drowning her. Look at you. You are nothing but a hired killer playing house." "Go home, Silas," Eli said. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. For a heartbeat. Clara thought the shooting would start. She could see the vein pulsing in Kincaid's temple. Then, Kincaid laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Have it your way," he said. He backed up, opening the door and letting the blizzard swirl in again. "Enjoy your night. But remember this, Clara, this cowboy protector of yours, he brings nothing but ruin. He has got blood on his hands that will never wash off. And when I am done with him, you will be out on the street with nothing but the clothes on your back." He swept a mocking bow and marched out into the night, his men trailing behind him. The door slammed shut. Clara let out a sob, her knees giving way. She slid down the wall, the lamp tilting dangerously until Eli caught it from her hand and set it on the floor. "Clara," he said, kneeling beside her. "You shouldn't have done that." She wept, covering her face with her hands. "He will kill you. He will take the house. He was going to hurt you," Eli said. His voice was flat, devoid of the anger he had shown Kincaid. "I could not watch that." "Everyone will know," she whispered. "By morning, everyone will say that we are—" "Let them talk," Eli said. He reached out, hovering his hand over her shoulder, then pulling it back. "Let them talk. Clara, you are safe tonight." But safety, Clara knew, was a fragile thing. The fallout was swift and brutal. Kincaid did not need to use bullets. He used words. He told the town that Eli had threatened him. He told them Clara was harboring a known criminal. He called in his favors. By Tuesday, the sewing orders stopped. Mrs. Miller sent a boy to collect her unfinished linens, without payment. By Wednesday, Mr. Finch packed his bags. Business in Denver. He lied, refusing to meet Clara's eyes as he scurried out the door. The schoolteacher left the same afternoon, claiming her sister in Laramie was ill. The boarding house was empty. Clara walked through the silent rooms. They felt larger now, and colder. The pantry was terrifyingly bare. The flour sack was empty. There were 3 potatoes left in the bin. She blamed herself. She had been too proud. She should have let Kincaid say his piece. She should have found a way to placate him. Now, she had dragged Eli down with her. Then, on Friday night, the world ended. It began with a drop in pressure that made ears pop. The sky turned a sickly, bruised green. And then the white wolf descended. It was not a storm. It was a living thing. The wind hit the house with the force of a battering ram. Shingles were ripped from the roof with sounds like pistol shots. The snow did not fall. It drove horizontally, packing against the doors and windows, sealing the house in a tomb of ice. Clara and Eli were in the kitchen. They had given up on the rest of the house. It was too expensive to heat. "It is a bad one," Eli said, listening to the roar in the chimney. "I have seen herds freeze standing up in weather like this." "We have coal for 2 days," Clara said, staring at the stove. "We will make it do," Eli said. They sat in silence as the temperature plummeted. The water in the bucket near the door froze solid. Around midnight, a sound like a thunderclap shook the house. A massive drift of snow, dislodged from the high roof, collapsed onto the chimney stack. Instantly, the draft reversed. Thick, acrid black smoke poured out of the stove, billowing into the kitchen and the downstairs hallway. "Open the door," Eli shouted. Coughing, he fought the back door, but the snow was piled 4 feet high against it. It wouldn't budge. The room was filling rapidly. The smoke stung their eyes, blinding them. "The flue is blocked," Clara screamed, pressing a rag to her face. "We have to put out the fire." "No," Eli grabbed her arm. "If we put it out, we freeze. We have to get up. Heat rises, but the smoke is heavy. Upstairs. Now!" He dragged her into the hallway. The smoke was thicker there, a choking gray fog. Clara stumbled, her lungs burning. She felt dizzy. The lack of air and the panic were overwhelming her. "I can't," she gasped, her knees buckling. Eli didn't hesitate. He swept her up into his arms, ignoring the strain on his bad leg, and carried her up the stairs. "Hold your breath, Clara," he rasped. He kicked open the door to his attic room. It was the only room with a separate stovepipe, a small tin flue that went out the side wall, not the main chimney. He dumped her onto the narrow bed and slammed the door, stuffing a towel into the crack at the bottom. He rushed to the small pot-bellied stove in the corner. It was cold. He grabbed the kindling bucket, his hands shaking, and struck a match. "Breathe," he commanded, looking back at her. Clara was curled on the mattress, coughing, tears streaming down her soot-smudged face. "The house," she choked out. "House will stand," Eli said, feeding wood into the tiny stove. "Just the chimney is blocked. We stay here until the wind shifts." The fire caught, a small, brave flicker in the freezing dark. But the attic was uninsulated. The wind sliced through the walls as if they were made of paper. Within an hour, the temperature in the room dropped below 0. The water in the pitcher on the washstand froze with a sharp crack. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in her shawl and the thin quilt. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, a rhythmic clicking sound that she couldn't stop. The cold was a physical weight, crushing her. Eli sat on the floor near the stove, feeding it splinters of wood. He was wearing his coat, but he was shivering too. "Take the bed," Clara stammered. Your leg." "I am fine," Eli said through gritted teeth. "You are freezing," she whispered. "So are you." The candle sputtered and died. The only light came from the orange glow of the stove vents. The darkness was absolute, and the cold was a living presence in the room, seeking out any warmth to destroy it. Clara felt her extremities going numb. She knew what this was. This was how Martin had died. You get cold, then you get tired, and then you just go to sleep. She looked at the dark shape of Eli on the floor. He was curled tight, his head tucked into his chest. She could not let him die. She could not die. Not like this. "Eli," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the wind. He lifted his head. "Yeah, it is too cold to sleep alone." The words hung in the freezing air. Clara stared at the wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She was terrified. She was asking a man into her bed, a man the town called a killer, a man who wasn't her husband, but the cold was stronger than the shame. Eli did not move for a long time. She heard his breath hitch. "Clara," he said, his voice strained. I can't. It is not right. I am not asking for that," she stuttered. "Just warmth. Please, I can't stop shaking." She reached out her hand into the darkness. Her fingers trembled. Searching, she waited. Then she felt it. His hand, rough, calloused, and freezing cold. He took her fingers. His grip was gentle, terrified. "Okay," he whispered. He stood up, the floorboards creaking. He did not take off his boots. He did not take off his coat. He sat on the edge of the narrow mattress. "Move over," he murmured. Clara scooted back against the icy wall, pulling the quilt up. Eli lay down on the edge of the bed, his back to her, leaving a clear inch of space between them. They lay there in the dark, stiff as boards. "Clara," he said after a moment, the blankets need to go over both of us, or it won't work." "Yes," she breathed. She lifted the edge of the quilt. Eli turned, shifting awkwardly on the narrow springs. He slid under the cover. They fit together like two pieces of a broken puzzle. There was no room for modesty. His back pressed against her chest, her knees tucked into the bend of his legs. The shock of his body heat was intense. He was like a furnace compared to the air. Clara gasped, instinctively pressing closer, seeking that life-saving warmth. Eli stiffened. She could feel the muscles in his back turn to iron. He held his breath. "I am sorry," she whispered into the collar of his coat. "I am so cold." "It is okay," he rasped. "Just stay still." But she couldn't stay still. The shivering was racking her body. Slowly, hesitantly, Eli turned over to face her. In the faint red glow from the stove, she saw his eyes. They were wide, dark, and filled with a mixture of desire and terror that mirrored her own. "Come here," he said softly. He opened his arms. Clara moved into them. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against him. His heavy canvas coat was rough against her cheek, but inside it, he was warm. He rubbed her back, brisk, firm strokes trying to generate heat. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she mumbled, her face pressed into his shoulder. She could smell the wood smoke in his shirt, the scent of him. They lay huddled together, limbs tangled for survival. Clara felt his heart hammering against her chest. It was beating fast, just like hers. "It has been so long," Clara whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. "Since anyone held me." Eli's hand paused on her back. "Martin," she choked on the name. "Martin never held me like this, unless he was drunk, unless he wanted something. And then his hands, they were heavy, they hurt." She felt Eli's arms tighten around her, a protective, fierce squeeze. "He hurt you?" Eli asked. His voice was dangerous. "He is dead," Clara said. "But I forgot what it felt like, to be warm without being afraid." Eli shifted his head, his forehead resting against hers. His breath ghosted over her lips. "I will not hurt you, Clara," he vowed. "I promise I will keep my hands where you want them. I will lie here and freeze before I take what you do not give." "I know," she whispered, and she did. She trusted this scarred, violent man more than she had ever trusted the lawful husband the church had given her. She moved her hand, sliding it under his coat, finding the warmth of his shirt. She could feel his ribs, the scars beneath the fabric. She stroked his side, a tentative, searching touch. Eli shuddered. A low sound escaped his throat, half groan, half prayer. "Clara," he warned, his voice breaking. "Be careful." "I'm tired of being careful," she said. She lifted her face. Their noses brushed. The air between them was thick, charged with the weeks of stolen glances and silent longing. He did not kiss her. He simply held her, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He held her as if she were made of glass, and he was terrified of shattering her. And in that freezing attic, with the wind howling like a demon outside and the world buried in ice, Clara Byrne finally stopped shaking. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. "Do not let go," she whispered. "Never," Eli answered in the dark. The morning sun that broke over Blackwood was blinding, a hard, diamond-bright glare reflecting off 4 feet of fresh snow. The storm had passed, leaving the town buried and silent, cut off from the rest of the territory as surely as if it had been dropped onto the moon. Inside the attic room, the light that filtered through the frosted window pane was merciless. It woke Clara Byrne from a sleep deeper than any she had known in years. She was curled on her side, her head resting on the rough wool of Eli's coat, her hand tangled in the fabric of his shirt. Eli was awake. He lay rigid, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light. He could feel every curve of her body pressed against his back, the slow rise and fall of her breath against his spine. The heat between them was a physical thing, a small, defiant furnace against the lingering chill of the room. For a long moment, neither of them moved. To move was to acknowledge what had happened, that they had crossed a line, that the widow and the drifter had spent the night tangled together in a bed meant for one. Clara pulled back first. She sat up, clutching the quilt to her chest, Her face flushed. "The storm is over," she whispered. Eli sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He kept his back to her, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, it is over." They moved around the small room like strangers, avoiding each other's eyes. The intimacy of the night before, the way he had held her, the way she had sought his warmth, burned beneath their skin, making the air thick and hard to breathe. "I should check the chimney," Eli said, his voice rough. "See if I can clear the block from the roof." "I will start coffee," Clara said, smoothing her wrinkled skirt. "If the stove downstairs will draw." They retreated to their separate tasks, taking refuge in the work. But as Clara stood in the kitchen, chipping ice from the water bucket, her hands were trembling. She could still feel the phantom weight of his arm across her waist. By noon, the town began to dig itself out. Men with shovels appeared on Main Street, cutting trenches through the drifts. The roads leading out of the valley were impassable, blocked by 10-foot walls of white. Blackwood was an island, and on that island, Silas Kincaid was king. He wasted no time. While the town was still blinking in the glare, Kincaid's men were spreading the word. 20 head of cattle were missing from the south pasture. The fence had been cut. It was rustlers, they said, and rustlers needed a man on the inside, a man who knew the trails, a man who needed money. By 2 o'clock, the sheriff, a heavy man named Roscoe, who owed his election to Kincaid's money, was standing on Clara's porch. He had 2 deputies with him, men who looked more like hired thugs than officers of the law. "Step aside, Mrs. Barn," Roscoe grunted, stamping snow from his boots. "We have a warrant to search the premises." "Search for what?" Clara demanded, blocking the doorway. "We have been snowed in for 2 days. Roscoe, nobody has left this house." "We had reports of stolen property," Roscoe said, pushing past her. "And you are harboring a man with a known history." Eli was in the parlor, mending a bridle. He stood up slowly as the lawman entered, his hand drifting toward his hip before he stopped himself. He saw the look in Roscoe's eyes. This was not an investigation. It was a performance. "Check his gear," Roscoe ordered the deputies. "You do not touch my things," Eli said, his voice low. "I will do whatever the law requires." "Boy," Roscoe sneered. The deputies tore through the room. They dumped Eli's saddlebags onto the floor. Spare shirts, a whetstone, a box of cartridges, and a small leather pouch spilled out. One of the deputies, a man with a gap-toothed grin, snatched up the pouch. He loosened the strings and upended it. 5 heavy gold coins rolled across the floorboards. They were double eagles, bright and impossible for a drifter to own. "Well now," Roscoe said, picking one up. He held it to the light. "Kincaid marks his private stock. See that scratch on the face? That is the Circle K mark." Eli stared at the coin. He had never seen it before in his life. The pouch wasn't his. It had been planted, likely during the confusion of the storm, or by one of Kincaid's men slipping in while they were clearing the snow. "That is not mine," Eli said calmly. "It came out of your bag." Roscoe said, "Grab him." "No!" Clara screamed. She threw herself between the deputies and Eli. "You are lying. I have watched him every day." "He has not been near the Kincaid ranch. He has been here working for his keep." "Maybe he has been doing more than working, Mrs. Byrne," Roscoe said, his eyes sliding over her disheveled appearance. "Folks say you two were mighty cozy during the blizzard." "You leave her be," Eli growled. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Don't do it, son," Roscoe warned, his hand on his revolver. "I've got 2 men here who would love an excuse." Eli froze. He looked at Clara. She was shaking, her face pale with fury and fear. If he fought, they would kill him right here in her parlor, and they would blame her for it. "I will go," Eli said. He held out his hands. The deputies rushed him, roughing him up as they shackled his wrists. They dragged him out the door and into the snow-packed street. A crowd had gathered. The town was bored and angry from the confinement, and they were hungry for a scapegoat. Kincaid sat on his black stallion near the gate, watching the spectacle with a thin, satisfied smile. "There he is," Kincaid called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "The wolf in the fold! I told you! Clara! I told you he was poison!" "He is innocent!" Clara shouted, running down the steps into the snow. She grabbed the sleeve of Roscoe's coat. "He was with me! The night the cattle were taken! He was here!" "All night, Mrs.?" Gable called from the crowd, her voice shrill. "Was he with you all night? Clara?" Clara faltered. The truth, that he had been in her bed, would damn her. The lie, that he was in his room, was flimsy. "He is a good man," Clara cried, tears freezing on her cheeks. "He is a thief," Kincaid said coldly. "And you, my dear, have made a terrible choice of friends. If you had trusted my protection, this riffraff would never have wormed his way under your roof." Clara looked at Kincaid, seeing the cruelty etched into the lines of his handsome face. He had done this. He had bought the sheriff, planted the coins, and turned the town against them, all to break her. "Take him to the lockup," Roscoe ordered. "We will let the judge sort it out when the road's clear." Eli looked back at her as they shoved him forward. His eyes were dark holes of regret. "Go inside, Clara," he mouthed. "Go inside." She stood in the street, the snow soaking the hem of her dress, watching until they dragged him around the corner. She was alone again, and this time, the silence of the house felt like a coffin. Night fell, bringing a fresh dusting of snow. The temperature dropped, freezing the slush in the streets into jagged ruts. In the small stone jailhouse, Eli sat on a cot that smelled of mildew and old despair. The cell was freezing. There was no fire. He could see his breath puffing in the darkness. He tested the bars for the 100th time. Solid iron. No way out. He leaned his head back against the stone wall. He was a fool. He should have kept riding. He should have never stopped in Blackwood. He had known better than to think he could have a life, a home, a woman like Clara. Men like him did not get happy endings. They got a rope or a bullet. Outside, a shadow moved across the high, barred window. "Eli?" A whisper. Eli jumped up, crossing to the window. "Clara!" "No, it is Daly. Mr. Daly, the railroad worker." Eli peered through the bars. The man looked terrible, his face gray and gaunt, wrapped in a blanket over his coat. He had been stuck at the depot hotel when the train stopped running. "Mr. Daly," Eli said, "you should not be out in this." "I had to come," the man wheezed. He looked over his shoulder nervously. "I heard them talking, Kincaid's men, in the hotel bar. They were laughing about it. About the coins. About the woman," Daly said. They said the boss wanted to teach the boarding house whore a lesson. That is what they called her. Eli. They said framing her pet cowboy was the easiest way to break her spirit so Kincaid could walk in and pick up the pieces. Eli's hands gripped the bars until his knuckles turned white. "You have to tell the sheriff. Roscoe knows," Daly said miserably. "Roscoe was drinking with them. He took money from Kincaid right there at the bar. Then tell the judge. When he gets here—" "I can't," Daly whispered. "I have a wife in Omaha. If I speak against Kincaid, men have accidents here. You know that. So you are going to let them hang me?" "I'm sorry," Daly said, stepping back into the shadows. I thought you should know. It wasn't you they were after. It was her." He vanished into the night, leaving Eli alone with the knowledge that his presence had not saved Clara. It had doomed her. An hour later, the heavy door to the jailhouse creaked open. Roscoe was snoring at his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He grunted but didn't wake as a figure slipped past him. Clara appeared at the cell door. She was wearing her heavy cloak, the hood pulled up. Her face was stark white, her eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "Clara," Eli breathed. He reached through the bars. She grabbed his hands. Her grip was desperate. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine," he said. "Clara, you have to leave. If Roscoe wakes up—" "He won't," she said. "He is passed out. I brought him a pie earlier, laced with laudanum." Eli stared at her. The boarding house keeper who worried about the price of flour had drugged the sheriff. "You are crazy," he said, a mixture of awe and terror in his voice. I am done being scared, she said. She pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars, close to his hands. Mr. Daly came to see me. He told me what he heard. Clara, it is all a lie, she said fiercely. The rustling, the coins, all of it. Not all of it, Eli said. The silence stretched between them. The wind rattled the stovepipe in the corner. What do you mean? Clara asked slowly. Eli pulled his hands back, retreating into the shadows of the cell. Kincaid was right about one thing. I did ride for him, 10 years ago, down in Texas. I know, she said. You told me you worked these lands. It was not work, Eli spat. It was war. He wanted the valley cleared. Squatters, sheep herders, Mexicans who had been there before the border moved. I burned them out. Clara stood still, her hands still gripping the bars. I lit the torches, Eli confessed, the words tearing out of him like jagged glass. I drove families into the winter with nothing but their night clothes. I watched a man die because he would not give up his plow horse. That is who I am. Clara, that is the man you let into your house, a hired gun, a dog for men like Kincaid. He waited for her to turn away. He waited for the look of disgust he deserved. Instead, Clara reached through the bars again. She reached deep until her hand found his face. She cupped his jaw, her thumb brushing the rough stubble on his cheek. Is that who you are now? She asked. Her voice was steady. Eli choked. I do not know. I know, Clara said. The man who did those things, would he have spent 3 months fixing a stranger's house for 50 cents a day? Would he have slept in a freezing bed beside a terrified woman and not touched her? Because he promised he wouldn't. Clara, I have got blood on me. We all have scars. Eli? She whispered. Kincaid thinks he can own us because of our pasts. He thinks my debt makes me his property. He thinks your sins make you his slave. But he is wrong. She leaned closer, her face pressed to the bars. What matters is who you choose to be tonight. Do you deserve to die for a crime you didn't commit, just because you committed others? Maybe, Eli said. Well, I do not accept that, she said. I trust you, Eli caved. More than I trust this town, more than I trust myself. Her touch was like a brand. It burned through his guilt, through the layers of shame he had carried for a decade. It felt like forgiveness. It felt like a promise. Clara, he rasped, covering her hand with his own. If I get out of here, I am not leaving you behind. I know, she said. Because I am coming with you. She pulled back. Reaching into her cloak, she produced a heavy ring of keys. How? Eli asked. Stunned. The schoolteacher, Miss Perkins, Clara said, a grim smile touching her lips. She never made it out of town. She's stuck at the parsonage. She distracted Roscoe's deputy at the back door, told him she saw a prowler, while the stable boy, Billy, boosted me through the window of the sheriff's office to get these off the hook. Miss Perkins, Eli almost laughed. The one who hates dust? She hates bullies more, Clara said. She fumbled with the lock. The key turned with a heavy clack. The door swung open. Come on, she whispered. Billy has whiskey saddled behind the livery and my mare. Eli stepped out of the cell. He felt lightheaded. We can't take 2 horses. Deep snow. We need the strongest mount. Whiskey can carry double if we pack light. Okay, she said. Hurry. They moved into the front office. Roscoe snorted, shifting in his chair. Eli froze, his hand instinctively going for a weapon he didn't have. Roscoe settled back into his stupor. They slipped out the front door into the alley. The cold hit them like a hammer. Hey! A voice from the corner. It was the deputy with the gap-toothed grin. He was coming back from the outhouse, buckling his belt. He saw them. His eyes went wide. Jailbreak! He shouted, reaching for his gun. Eli didn't think. He launched himself across the alley. He hit the deputy before the gun cleared the holster. They went down in the snow, a tangle of limbs and grunts. The deputy was strong, but Eli was fighting for Clara's life. He took a heavy blow to the ribs, grunted, and slammed his fist into the deputy's jaw. The man went limp. Eli scrambled up, gasping. His knuckles were split and bleeding. "Run!" he hissed to Clara. They sprinted through the deep drifts behind the buildings. The town was waking up. Shouts echoed from Main Street. A gunshot rang out, wild and warning. They reached the livery stable. Billy, the boy who had first pointed Eli to the boarding house, was there, holding Whiskey's reins. The horse was stamping nervously, his breath steaming. "Go!" Billy whispered, shoving the reins into Eli's hand. "Go north, to the ridge." "Thank you, son," Eli said. He swung into the saddle, ignoring the scream of pain from his bad leg. He reached down and hauled Clara up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his coat. "Hang on," Eli shouted. He kicked Whiskey into a gallop. The big horse surged forward, plowing through the snow. They burst out of the alley and onto the open plain, just as the sheriff's office door banged open and men spilled out into the street. Bullets whizzed past them, buzzing like angry hornets. One struck the snow near Whiskey's hooves, kicking up a spray of white. Then they were in the dark, the wind swallowing the sound of the guns, the lights of Blackwood fading into a dull glow behind them. They rode for hours. The snow was deep, slowing their pace to a grueling trudge. The wind was relentless, seeking out every gap in their clothing. Clara clung to Eli's back. She could feel the heat of his body through the layers of wool and canvas. It was the only anchor she had in a world that had turned to ice. She pressed her cheek against his spine, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, sinking her own to it. They were outlaws now. There was no going back. The boarding house, the linens, the reputation she had fought so hard to save. It was all gone. And strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. By dawn, they reached the foothills. The trees offered some shelter from the wind, but the cold was deepening. Whiskey was blown, his head hanging low. "We have to stop," Eli said, his voice cracking. "Horse needs to rest. We need fire." They found a rocky overhang, a shallow cave protected by a screen of pine trees. Eli slid off the horse and nearly collapsed, his leg giving way. Clara caught him, her small frame straining against his weight. "I've got you," she whispered. They huddled together under the rock. Eli managed to start a small fire with dry pine needles and dead branches. It was a meager flame, but it was life. They had one bedroll, Eli's, which had been on his saddle. They spread it on the frozen ground near the fire. They lay down together, wrapped in the blankets and their coats. They were shivering violently, their bodies racked with the spasms of hypothermia. "Closer," Eli chattered. Clara pulled herself against him. She wrapped her legs around his, trying to share every ounce of warmth she possessed. They were a tangle of desperate limbs and chattering teeth. Slowly, the shivering began to subside. The warmth of the fire and their shared body heat created a small pocket of survival. Eli turned his head. His face was inches from hers. He looked wild, his eyes bloodshot, a bruise darkening on his cheekbone where the deputy had hit him. But he was alive. "You came for me," he whispered, as if he still couldn't believe it. "I told you," Clara said softly. "I am not sleeping alone." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. His thumb traced the line of her lip. "Clara," he kissed her. It wasn't like the kisses in the dime novels. It tasted of wood smoke, exhaustion, and fear. It was a desperate, hungry meeting of mouths, a collision of two people who had nothing left but each other. Clara made a small sound in her throat and pressed closer, her hands tangling in his hair. She kissed him back with a ferocity that startled them both. It was a claiming. "You are mine, I am yours. We are alive." The kiss deepened, becoming frantic. Eli's hand moved down her back, pressing her hips against his. For a moment, the fire in their blood burned hotter than the cold outside. They wanted to disappear into each other, to use the act of love to forget the men hunting them and the snow trying to bury them. But then Eli pulled back. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "No," he gasped. "Not like this. Eli. Not while we are running," he said. Not while you are scared. When I take you, Clara, it is going to be in a bed, a warm bed, and it is going to be because we are safe, not because we are afraid of dying." Clara looked at him, seeing the fierce, stubborn honor in his eyes. He wanted to give her dignity, even here, in the dirt and the snow. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She kissed his cheek, then settled her head on his shoulder. "Okay," she whispered. "When we are safe." "Sleep," Eli said, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "I will watch the fire." Outside the cave, the wind shrieked through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, the howl of a wolf answered. But under the rock, Clara Byrne closed her eyes and slept, held fast in the arms of the man who had burned down the world to keep her warm. The wind had stopped screaming, replaced by a silence that was almost worse. It was the silence of a world picked clean, a white void where the only sound was the laboring breath of the horse and the crunch of snow under failing boots. Clara Byrne walked beside Whiskey. The big bay gelding was done, his head hanging so low his muzzle nearly brushed the drifts. Eli Cade walked on the other side, his hand gripping the saddle horn not to lead the horse, but to keep himself upright. They had been in the wilderness for 5 days. The food was gone. The last of the jerky had been eaten 2 days ago, and they were surviving on melted snow and the stubborn refusal to die. They had ridden north, into the broken country where the foothills collided with the granite spine of the mountains. It was a land of box canyons and hidden draws, places where the sun only touched the ground for an hour at noon. "Eli," Clara rasped. Her lips were cracked, bleeding in the cold, dry air. "Smoke." Eli stopped. He swayed, blinked, and squinted against the glare. High up, against the gray slate of a cliff face, a thin ribbon of darker gray curled into the sky. It was wood smoke. "Could be Kincaid's men," Eli said. His voice was a wreck, a husk of what it had been. He checked the Colt on his hip. He had 3 cartridges left. "Or it could be help," Clara said. "We have to chance it." They moved forward, dragging their bodies through the snow. As they crested a ridge, the ground fell away into a narrow, bowl-shaped valley. It was sheltered from the wind by high rock walls, and down in the bottom, a cluster of crude structures huddled among the pines. There were lean-tos made of pine boughs and canvas, a few dugouts cut into the earth, and a central fire pit where a cookpot hung. Eli stiffened. "I know this place," he whispered. "Not the camp, the people." Before they could turn back, a shout went up from the valley floor. 3 men emerged from a dugout, rifles in their hands. They did not look like Kincaid's hired guns. They wore mismatched rags, furs, and hats that had seen better decades. "Hold!" one of the men shouted. He was a giant, with a beard like steel wool and a blacksmith's leather apron worn over a buffalo coat. "That is far enough." Eli let go of the saddle horn. He took a step forward, putting himself between the rifles and Clara. "We need food," Eli called out, "and shelter. We have a woman here." The blacksmith squinted. He raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at Eli's chest. "I know you," he growled. The recognition was instant and filled with hate. "You are Cade, the saint. You rode with the regulators in 78. A murmur went through the camp. People began to emerge from the shelters, women with hollow faces, children clinging to their skirts, men with missing fingers and old scars. They looked at Eli not with curiosity, but with the terrifying stillness of prey that has found the predator trapped. "He is Kincaid's wolf," a woman screamed. She picked up a stone. "He burned my brother's cabin. I remember him," another man shouted. "He was there at the crossing." Clara watched in horror as the mood shifted from caution to violence. These were the people Blackwood had thrown away. The mixed-blood families, the squatters, the people Kincaid had crushed to build his empire, and they saw the architect of their ruin standing before them. Eli did not draw his gun. He did not run. Slowly, painfully, he unbuckled his gun belt. He let it drop into the snow. Then he sank to his knees. He held his empty hands out, palms up. "I was that man," Eli said. His voice carried in the cold acoustics of the valley. "I rode for him. I took your land. I burned your homes." He looked at the blacksmith. "I have no right to ask for mercy, but the woman, she is innocent. She is running from him just like you. Feed her. Do what you want with me." The blacksmith cocked the hammer of his rifle. "Justice is long overdue. Cade, wait." The single word was soft, but it stopped the blacksmith's finger. A man stepped out from the shadows of the pines. He was native, perhaps Arapaho or Shoshone, dressed in buckskins and a heavy wool blanket. He moved with a quiet grace that the starvation of the camp had not touched. He walked past the blacksmith and stopped 5 feet from Eli. He looked down at the kneeling cowboy. Eli looked up. He recognized the dark, steady eyes. He had seen them 10 years ago, through the sights of a Winchester, across a burning pasture. "I remember you," the man said. "You were at the Willow Creek raid." "I was," Eli whispered. "The order was to leave no fighting-age males," the man said. "I was backed against the river. You had the shot. You lowered your rifle." The camp went silent. "Why?" the man asked. "I was tired of the blood," Eli said. "And you looked like you had more right to be there than I did." The native man studied Eli's face, reading the lines of grief and the scars of the years since. He nodded once, slowly. He lowered the rifle, the man announced to the group, turning his back on Eli to face the blacksmith. He chose not to kill when he was paid to do it. "That is worth a bowl of stew." The blacksmith hesitated, the rifle barrel wavering. He looked at Clara, who was leaning against the horse, pale as death, her eyes blazing with defiance. Then he looked at Eli, kneeling in the snow, offering his life for hers. "Take the gun," the blacksmith grunted to a younger boy. "Bring the horse. Get them to the fire before they freeze to death, but watch him." The camp was a tapestry of survival woven from desperation. It was called, simply, the Hollow. Clara and Eli were given a small, 3-sided lean-to at the edge of the circle. It was barely a shelter, but it had a fire pit and a pile of dry pine needles for a bed. Over the next few days, as the strength returned to their limbs, Clara began to see the true shape of Silas Kincaid's power. In town, Kincaid was a businessman, a pillar of the community who occasionally played rough. Here, in the Hollow, he was a monster. She sat by the fire with a woman named Sarah, a former prostitute who had been driven out of Blackwood when the new preacher arrived, and Kincaid decided to clean up the town's image. Sarah was nursing a baby that was too thin, her eyes hard as flint. "He took the water rights first," Sarah told Clara, sharing a piece of hardtack. "Then he sent the men to cut the fences. When my husband tried to fix them, they shot him, said it was an accident. Then the bank took the deed, and Kincaid bought it for pennies." Clara listened to the stories. There was Tobias, the blacksmith, whose shop had been burned because he shod horses for the sheep herders. There was the native man, who was called Gray Wolf, whose family had been hunted for sport along the creek bottoms. Every story ended the same way. Kincaid got richer, and they got dead or exiled. Clara felt the anger building in her chest. It was not the hot, flashy anger of the moment. It was a cold, dense weight. What had happened to her? The rumors, the threats, the boarding house was just one stitch in a massive, bloody quilt. Eli worked. He did not speak much. He knew he was on probation. He worked as if he were trying to outrun his own shadow. He dragged fallen trees from the tree line, limping heavily but refusing help. He split wood until a pile stood as high as the shelters. He fixed the handle of Tobias's sledgehammer. He patched the canvas roof of Sarah's dugout. His hands, already rough, cracked and bled. He wrapped them in rags and kept working. Clara watched him. She saw the way he moved among these people, head down, shoulders hunched, waiting for a blow. He was trying to pay a debt that could not be calculated in firewood. One afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the valley floor. A group of children were playing near the fire, throwing snowballs. A little girl, no older than 5, tripped and fell hard, scraping her knee on a rock hidden in the snow. She wailed, a thin, high sound. The other adults were busy. Eli was the closest. He dropped the log he was carrying and knelt beside her. "Easy now. Little bit," he murmured. He didn't touch her. He was too aware of the mothers watching like hawks. But he pulled a red handkerchief from his pocket. He quickly tied it into a rabbit shape, making the ears twitch with his fingers. The girl stopped crying. She stared at the cloth rabbit. "He is fast," Eli whispered conspiratorially. "You have to be quiet, or he will run." The girl giggled. She reached out and took the rabbit. Then, without a shred of the fear her parents held, she climbed onto Eli's knee to show him her scrape. Eli froze. He looked at the small hand resting on his arm. He looked at the girl's trusting face. Across the clearing, Clara watched. She saw the way Eli's face softened, the way the hard lines of guilt and violence smoothed out for a heartbeat. He looked like a man who had been starving for a different kind of nourishment. She felt a soft, aching pain in her heart. He would be a good father. The thought shocked her. He had so much love stored up, fermented under layers of shame, and he had nowhere to pour it. The turning point came a week later. The wind was howling outside the valley, but down in the bowl, the air was still. Tobias, the blacksmith, called Eli and Clara to the main fire. He pulled a heavy, oilskin-wrapped bundle from inside his coat. "I was Kincaid's foreman for 2 years, Tobias said, his voice rumbling like gravel. "Before he decided I knew too much. When I left, when I ran, I took this." He unwrapped the package. It was a ledger, a thick, leather-bound book with pages yellowed by tobacco smoke. Tobias opened it. He wrote it all down, every bribe to the sheriff, every payment to the judge in Denver, the dates he paid men to burn the homesteads, the weights of the cattle he stole from the smaller outfits to boost his own counts. Clara leaned forward, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "This is proof." "It is a death warrant," Tobias said. "If he knows I have this, he will burn this whole valley to get it back." "Or," Clara said, her voice steady and clear, "it is the rope that hangs him." She looked around the circle of faces. "We can't stay here forever. We are eating bark and boiling leather. The children are getting sick. We have to go back." "Go back?" Sarah scoffed. "To get shot?" "To fight," Clara said. "We have the truth now. Not just stories. Proof. If we get this to the federal marshal in Cheyenne, or if we put it in front of the town when the circuit judge comes through. Kincaid is finished." "The town hates us," a man muttered. "The town is scared," Clara countered. "There is a difference. They know something is wrong. They just need someone to stand up first." She turned to Eli. He was staring at the fire, his expression unreadable. "Eli," she said. He looked up. The fear in his eyes was naked. "If we go back," he said slowly, "and that book is opened, my name is in there too. Tobias, isn't it?" Tobias nodded solemnly. 78, the payments for the regulators. It is all there." "Cade." Eli looked at Clara. "If we expose him, we expose me. The town already thinks I am a villain. This proves it. I will trade a freezing death here for a hanging there." Clara moved to him. She did not care that the camp was watching. She took his hands, her thumbs rubbing over the cracked knuckles. "They might try," she said, "but I will be there. And Tobias, and Grey Wolf. We will tell them who you are now. I am the man in the book." "Clara," he whispered. "No," she said fiercely. "You were that man. You chose to leave him. You chose to save me. You chose to freeze in an attic rather than dishonor me. That is the man I know. That is the man I trust." She almost said love. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken but loud as a shout. "You can run, Eli," she said. "You can take whiskey and go over the pass when it clears. No one would blame you. But I am going back. I am taking that book, and I am going to take back my home." Eli looked at her, this small, fierce woman in a torn dress, standing up to a world of giants. He saw the absolute faith she had in him, a faith he had never possessed for himself. He took a breath. It shuddered in his chest. "I am not letting you walk into that fire alone," he said. That night, the camp was quiet. The decision had been made. They would wait for the first sign of the spring thaw. when the roads would be muddy but passable, and they would move on the town in force, in their lean-to. Clara and Eli sat on the pine boughs. The fire had died down to a bed of glowing red coals. The air was cold, but under the heavy buffalo robes Tobias had lent them, it was warm. They were lying on their sides, facing each other. The space between them, which had been a barrier of propriety and fear for so long, finally collapsed. "Clara," Eli whispered. He reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was trembling. Clara covered his hand with hers and turned her face, pressing a kiss into his palm. "I am not afraid, Eli, not of you." "I am," he confessed. "I am afraid I will break you." "I am not glass," she said. "I am iron. You taught me that." She reached for the buttons of his shirt. Her fingers were steady. She undid them one by one, parting the fabric to reveal the scarred skin of his chest. There were old bullet wounds, knife slashes, the white puckered marks of a life lived in violence. She leaned forward and kissed the scar over his heart. Eli gasped, his back arching. "Clara." "Shh." She guided his hands to the buttons of her bodice. He was clumsy, his breathing ragged, but he was gentle, so incredibly gentle. He peeled the layers away with a reverence that made her want to weep. When they were skin to skin, the heat was shocking. They did not rush. There was no frantic grasping. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. Clara traced the ridge of his spine, the hard muscles of his shoulders. Eli's hands memorized the curve of her waist, the softness of her hip. He looked at her in the firelight as if she were a revelation. "You are beautiful," he choked out. "God, Clara, you are so beautiful." When he finally moved over her, he hesitated, his weight held off her by his forearms. He searched her eyes, looking for any sign of the fear she had felt with Martin. "Tell me to stop," he said. "Tell me, and I will." "Do not stop," she whispered, pulling him down. Their lovemaking was a conversation without words. It was Eli asking forgiveness with every touch, and Clara granting it with every breath. It was fierce. Yes, a claiming of life in the face of death. But it was also tender. It was the healing of old wounds. Clara cried out, not in pain, but in release, burying her face in his neck. Eli held her as if she were the only solid thing in the universe, anchoring him to the earth. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the firs. The fire popped softly. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the slow, strong beat of his heart. She felt clean. The shame the town had tried to heap on her, the shame she had carried for Martin's failures, it was gone, burned away. "They will call it a sin," she murmured into the darkness. "When we go back, the preacher, the biddies, they will say we are living in sin." Eli tightened his arm around her. "Let them say it. It isn't," she said firmly. Us, it is not a sin. It is survival. It is the only true thing I have found in this whole damn territory." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you, Eli Cade." Eli looked at her. Tears welled in his dark eyes, spilling over to track through the soot on his cheeks. He had never heard those words directed at him, not once. "I love you, Clara," he whispered. "I will love you until the last fire goes out." "Then promise me," she said. "Promise me we win." Eli sat up, pulling the blanket around them both. He looked out at the snowy valley, his face hardening into the expression of the warrior he used to be, but tempered now by something stronger than duty. "I vow it," he said. "I will walk back into that town. I will face the sheriff. I will face Kincaid, and I will face what I did, but I will not do it alone." "No," Clara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Never alone." The next morning, the planning began. They gathered in Tobias's dugout. The ledger lay on the table like a loaded weapon. "We need a way to get it into town without Kincaid's riders finding it," Tobias said. "They will be watching the roads. They will search anyone who looks like us." Clara picked up her sewing basket, the one thing she had saved from the boarding house besides the clothes on her back. "Give it to me," she said. She took the ledger. She ripped the hard leather cover off, leaving only the bound pages. Then she took her basket and dumped out the spools of thread and scraps of fabric. She used her shears to cut the false bottom of the basket lining. She slid the sheaf of papers underneath, then carefully, painstakingly, began to sew the lining back down. Her stitches were tiny, precise, and invisible. "I will carry it," she said. "They might search a man, they might check saddlebags, but they won't look twice at a woman's mending." "The thaw is coming," Grey Wolf said, standing by the door. "I can smell the rain in the wind. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "In 3 weeks," Eli said, checking the action of the pistol Tobias had given him. "The circuit judge will be in Blackwood for the spring session. The town will be full. Ranchers coming in for supplies. Strangers. We go in then," Clara said, snapping a thread with her teeth. "We go in when the eyes of the territory are watching. We walk right down the middle of the street." "It will be a fight," Tobias warned. "Kincaid won't go quietly." Eli looked at Clara. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw the woman who had dragged a crate of coal through a stuck door, who had stood between him and a lynch mob. "Let it be a fight," Eli said. "We have run far enough." Outside, the first drop of icy rain hit the snow, drilling a tiny hole in the white crust. The season was turning, the freeze was ending, and the reckoning was coming. The wind that blew down from the high passes in March was different. It no longer carried the scent of dry ice and frozen pine needles. It smelled of wet earth, of rotting vegetation, and of mud. The great white silence of the winter was breaking, cracking open with the sound of dripping water and the roar of swollen creeks. Clara Byrne rode a borrowed mare, her hands gripping the reins so tight her knuckles were white. Beside her, on the big bay gelding Whiskey, rode Eli Cade. Behind them, a grim procession of 6 riders from the hidden valley trailed in the slush. Tobias the blacksmith, Grey Wolf, Sarah, and 3 men who had lost their farms to the Circle K. They moved slowly. The road to Blackwood was a quagmire of half-melted snow and sucking mud that reached the horses' fetlocks. Clara looked at Eli. He was pale, his eyes scanning the ridgeline constantly. He had shaved his beard that morning with a knife sharpened on a river stone, leaving his jaw clean and the long scar on his neck exposed. He looked like a man riding to his own funeral. "We can still turn back," Eli said softly, his voice barely audible over the squelch of hooves. "You do not have to do this, Clara. I can take you to Laramie. We can start over." Clara touched the sewing basket tied to her saddle horn. Beneath the spools of thread and the darning egg lay the ledger, sewn into the lining. "There is no starting over," Clara said, staring at the church steeple that rose like a needle in the distance. "Not until we finish this. If we run now, Kincaid wins, and I am done letting him win." They rode past the first outlying shacks. The town looked exactly the same as the day they had fled, yet it felt smaller. The buildings seemed to lean more precariously, the paint more peeled. It was a town that was slowly dying, choked by the greed of one man. Kincaid's men were there. 2 of them sat on the porch of the livery, whittling. They stopped when they saw the group. They stood up slowly, hands drifting to their belts. "Keep riding," Eli ordered the group, his voice low and hard. "Do not stop. Do not draw unless I do." They rode down the center of Main Street. The mud splattered against the boardwalks. Faces appeared in windows, pale, frightened faces. They recognized the widow. They recognized the rustler. And they recognized the outcasts riding behind them. Clara pulled her horse up in front of the church. It was Sunday, but court was in session. The circuit judge, a man named Abernathy, had arrived 2 days ago, delayed by the snow. He was holding hearings in the church because the stove in the town hall was broken. "Tobias, stay with the horses," Eli said, dismounting. He winced as his bad leg hit the ground, but he stood tall. "Grey Wolf, watch the street." Clara slid down from her saddle. She grabbed her sewing basket. She smoothed her skirt, which was stained with mud and wood smoke, and walked up the steps. Eli walked beside her. He did not touch her, but his presence was a shield, solid and immovable. Clara pushed the heavy oak doors open. The church was warm and smelled of damp wool and floor wax. Judge Abernathy sat at a table near the altar, reviewing papers. Sheriff Roscoe stood nearby, looking bored. Silas Kincaid sat in the front pew, his arm draped casually over the backrest, looking like a king holding court. The room was packed with townspeople. When the doors banged open, every head turned. Silence slammed into the room. "Mrs. Byrne," the sheriff said, his hand dropping to his gun. "You have got a lot of nerve coming back here, and you brought the fugitive." "I brought a witness." "Sheriff," Clara said. Her voice shook, but she forced it to steady. She walked down the center aisle, her boots thudding on the wood. Eli walked a step behind her, his eyes locked on Kincaid. Kincaid stood up. He smiled, but it was a tight, dangerous expression. Well, the prodigal widow returns, and she brought her pet rustler to turn him in. Smart girl. Clara, maybe the judge will go easy on you for harboring him." "I am not here to turn him in," Clara said. She stopped at the table, facing the judge. "I am here to report a crime, Your Honor. A series of crimes that have been rotting this town from the inside out." Judge Abernathy looked over his spectacles. "This is a court of law, Mrs. Byrne, not a sewing circle. You are wanted for aiding a jailbreak." "And I will answer for that," Clara said. "After you see this—" She set the sewing basket on the table. She took a pair of small scissors from her pocket. Kincaid frowned, stepping into the aisle. "What is this nonsense?" Kincaid demanded. "Roscoe, arrest them." "Wait," the judge said. Clara jammed the scissors into the bottom of the basket. She ripped the fabric lining. The sound of tearing cloth was loud in the quiet room. She reached in and pulled out the sheaf of yellowed papers, bound with twine. She slammed them onto the table. "This is the ledger of the Circle K Ranch," Clara announced, her voice ringing off the rafters. "Kept by Mr. Tobias Miller, former foreman. It details every bribe paid to Sheriff Roscoe. It lists the dates when Mr. Kincaid paid men to cut the fences of the Box T Ranch. It lists the payments made to arsonists to burn the homes of the families in the valley." The room erupted in whispers. Roscoe's face turned the color of old dough. Kincaid's smile vanished. "That is a forgery!" Kincaid shouted, moving forward. "She is a liar and a whore. She has been living in the dirt with thieves." "It is not a forgery," Clara said, opening the book. "The handwriting matches the bank drafts you signed last week. Silas, and the dates match the fires." Kincaid lunged. "Give me that." Eli stepped in. He moved with a speed that belied his injury. He planted himself between Clara and Kincaid, his hand hitting Kincaid's chest, stopping the bigger man cold. "Do not touch her," Eli said. Kincaid glared at him. You are the one who burned those homes. Cade, everyone knows it. You are trying to pin your sins on me." Eli did not back down. He turned to the crowd. He looked at the faces of the people who had spat on him, the people who had called him a monster. "He is right," Eli said. His voice was rough, carrying to the back of the church. "I burned them." A gasp went through the room. 10 years ago, Eli continued, "I rode for the Circle K. I took orders from Silas Kincaid. I lit the torches. I drove the sheep off the cliffs. I scared the family so bad they ran into the snow with no shoes." He looked at the judge. "I did those things. I am guilty of them. And I did every single one of them because this man paid me $50 a month and told me it was the law." "He is lying," Kincaid roared. "I am not lying," Eli said quietly. "I am done lying. I am done running. I am a sinner, Your Honor. But I am not a thief, and I never stole cattle from this man. The only thing I ever stole was the peace of those families, and I am here to pay for it." He looked at Clara, but she had no part in it, and neither did the people outside. The judge picked up the ledger. He looked at Roscoe, who was sweating profusely. "Sheriff, this ledger lists a payment to you of $200 on the day of the jailbreak." "Care to explain?" Roscoe stammered, his eyes darting to the door. Kincaid saw the walls closing in. He saw the way the townspeople were looking at him, not with fear, but with sudden, dawning anger. He saw his empire crumbling because of a sewing basket and a washed-up cowboy. "To hell with this," Kincaid snarled. He drew his gun. "No!" Clara screamed. Eli shoved Clara behind the heavy oak table just as Kincaid fired. The bullet splintered the wood of the pulpit. Panic exploded. People screamed and dove under the pews. The judge scrambled back, overturning his chair. "Get them!" Kincaid shouted to his men. "Kill them all!" Eli grabbed Clara's arm. "Out the side door! Go!" He didn't wait for her to argue. He pushed her toward the sacristy door and turned, drawing his own weapon. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Get down!" Eli roared. He backed out of the room, covering Clara's retreat. They burst out into the side alley, into the mud and the cold air. "To the street!" Eli shouted. "We need cover!" They ran toward the livery stable. The street was chaos. Kincaid's men were pouring out of the saloon and the general store, guns drawn. But from the other end of the street, the camp survivors were advancing. Tobias leveled his buffalo gun over the saddle of a horse and fired. The boom was like a cannon. One of Kincaid's hired guns took a spray of wood splinters to the face and went down screaming. "Get behind the trough," Eli yelled, shoving Clara down behind the thick oak of the horse trough in front of the mercantile. Bullets slapped into the water, sending icy sprays over them. The air was filled with the smell of black powder and sulfur. "We are pinned down," Clara gasped, wiping mud from her eyes. "Stay down," Eli ordered. He popped up, fired 2 shots, and ducked back down as a return volley chipped the wood near his head. Kincaid strode into the middle of the street. He was manic, his hat gone, his expensive coat flapping open. He was firing wildly at the trough. "Come out, Cade!" Kincaid screamed. "Come out and die like a man! You think you can take what is mine? I own this valley. I own you!" From the doorway of the hotel, a figure stumbled out. It was Mr. Daly, the railroad foreman. He looked pale and sick, leaning on a cane. He saw Clara huddled behind the trough. He saw Kincaid stop, reload, and take careful aim, not at Eli, but at the exposed hem of Clara's dress where she knelt. Kincaid grinned. He was going to shoot through the wood. "Misses! Burn!" Daly shouted. He threw himself off the porch. He moved faster than a dying man should. He threw his body in front of the trough just as Kincaid pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Daly in the chest with a wet thud. He spun around and collapsed into the mud, sliding down against the wood of the trough. "Mr. Daly!" Clara screamed. She scrambled over to him, ignoring the gunfire. She pulled his head into her lap. Blood was bubbling on his lips. He looked up at her, his eyes losing focus. "Owed you one," he wheezed. "For the soup. No, no, no." Clara wept, pressing her hands to his chest. "Trains, leaving," Daly whispered, and then he was gone. Eli looked at the dead man. He looked at Clara's blood-soaked hands. Something inside him broke. Not a breaking of bone, but a breaking of chains. The restraint he had held onto, the fear of his own nature, vanished. He stood up. He walked out from behind the trough. He walked into the middle of the street, into the mud, into the open. "Kincaid!" Eli roared. The sound was animal, raw and terrifying. Kincaid turned. The shooting stopped. The sudden silence was heavy. Even the hired guns lowered their weapons, sensing that this was personal, that this was the end. Eli stood 20 paces from Kincaid. He held his Colt at his side. He did not raise it. "You killed a good man," Eli said. His voice was dead calm. "For what? For pride? For money?" "For order," Kincaid spat. "Because I am the only thing holding this town together. You are just a dog, Cade, a dog who bit the hand that fed him." "I am not a dog," Eli said. "And I am not your soldier. Not anymore." "Then die," Kincaid said. He raised his gun. Eli watched the barrel rise. He saw the tension in Kincaid's finger. In the old days, Eli would have shot to kill. He would have put a bullet between Kincaid's eyes without blinking. But he heard Clara's voice in his head. "What matters is who you choose to be." Eli moved. It was a blur of motion. He brought his gun up. Kincaid fired. The bullet tugged at the sleeve of Eli's coat. Grazing his arm, Eli fired. He did not aim for the heart. He aimed for the shoulder. The bullet struck Kincaid high in the right shoulder, shattering the bone. Kincaid spun around, dropping his gun. He fell into the mud, screaming, clutching his ruined arm. Eli walked forward. He kicked Kincaid's gun away. He stood over the man who had owned him for so long. Kincaid lay in the slush, looking up with eyes full of shock and pain. Eli cocked the hammer. He aimed at Kincaid's head. The town held its breath. Clara watched from the trough, her hands covered in Daly's blood. She did not look away. "Do it," Kincaid hissed. "Finish it." Eli looked at him. He looked at the blood spreading in the snow. "No," Eli said. He carefully lowered the hammer. He holstered the gun. "I am not your executioner, Silas," Eli said. "I am just a man who wants to sleep in peace." He turned his back on Kincaid. Sheriff Roscoe stepped off the boardwalk. He looked at the ledger lying in the mud where Clara had dropped it during the escape. He looked at the judge, who was standing on the church steps, looking furious. He looked at Kincaid, broken and bleeding. Roscoe made a choice. "Get the cuffs," Roscoe said to his deputy. "Arrest him." "You work for me," Kincaid shrieked as the deputy hauled him up. "Not anymore. Silas," Roscoe said. "Judge, I will take full responsibility for my part, but this man goes to the cell." Eli walked back to the trough. He knelt in the mud beside Clara. He took her bloody hands in his. "It is over," he whispered. Clara looked at him. She looked at the scar on his neck, the mud on his coat, the steady light in his dark eyes. She leaned her forehead against his chest and wept. The thaw came in earnest after that. The snow vanished, leaving the hills green and the creeks running clear. Blackwood did not change overnight. Prejudice is a weed with deep roots. You cannot pull it all out at once. There were still people who crossed the street when Clara walked by. There were still whispers in the church pews about the widow living in sin with the gunman, Mrs. Gable never spoke to Clara again, but there were cracks in the ice. Mr. Higgins at the general store quietly wiped Clara's debt off the books, claiming a clerical error. The new railroad foreman who replaced Mr. Daly brought his crew to stay at the boarding house, filling every room with paying customers. Clara and Eli rebuilt, with the help of Tobias and Grey Wolf. They fixed the roof properly. They painted the siding a bright, defiant blue. They turned the boarding house into something new, not just a place to sleep, but a sanctuary. Travelers came, drifters came. People who didn't fit in anywhere else found a warm fire and a hot meal at Mrs. Burns' place. They found a stern but kind woman who ran the kitchen, and a quiet, limping man who kept the peace without ever raising his voice. Eli worked. He took jobs at the smaller ranches, the ones that had been crushed by Kincaid. He helped them rebuild their fences. He taught their sons how to rope. He never carried a gun anymore. Except when he was hunting. He didn't need to. His reputation had changed. He was no longer the saint. He was just Eli. And in the evenings, when the work was done, he came home. It was a Tuesday in late April. A freak spring storm had blown in off the mountains, a last gasp of winter trying to reclaim the plains. The wind rattled the newly fixed windows and hissed under the doors. In the kitchen, the lamp cast a warm, golden circle of light. Clara sat in her rocking chair, a pile of mending in her lap. She was sewing a button onto one of Eli's flannel shirts. Eli sat at the table, polishing his boots. He stopped and looked at her. "Listen to that wind," he said softly. Clara paused, her needle hovering. "It sounds angry." "Let it be angry," Eli said. "It can't get in." He stood up and walked over to her. He knelt beside the chair, resting his hand on her knee. His fingers were rough, stained with oil and earth, but his touch was gentle. "You look tired," he said. "I am," she admitted, "but it is a good tired." "Come to bed," he said. They walked upstairs together. They did not go to separate rooms. They had not slept apart since the day of the gunfight. The town could whisper all it wanted. Clara and Eli had walked through fire to be together, and they would not apologize for the peace they had found. Their bedroom was warm. The big stove downstairs kept the heat rising. They undressed in the soft light of the candle. Clara unbraided her hair, letting it fall over her shoulders. Eli hung his shirt on the back of the chair. He caught her watching him in the mirror. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, looking at their reflection. Two people scarred by life, weathered by the wind, but standing solid. "Do you remember?" Clara asked, leaning back against him. "The attic?" "Every night," Eli said. "I remember how cold you were." "I was terrified," she whispered. "I thought if I touched you, I would burn." "And now?" Clara turned in his arms. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and full of a quiet, unshakable certainty. "It is too cold to sleep alone," she said, a smile touching her lips. Eli laughed, a low, warm sound that rumbled in his chest. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It surely is." He blew out the candle. They climbed into the bed, pulling the thick quilts up over their shoulders. Outside, the wind howled across the vast, empty prairie, searching for something to freeze, but inside, in the dark, they curled together, limbs tangling, hearts beating in a steady, shared rhythm. The light in the boarding house was out, but the warmth remained, a fragile, stubborn flame of defiance against the harsh world. Two people, safe in the dark, who refused, ever again, to sleep alone. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Clara and Eli. It has been a journey through the cold winds of the high plains to the warmth of a hard-won love. I hope their story of resilience and redemption resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story. Did you think Eli made the right choice in the end? If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of the American frontier, where history and heart collide. Thank you for your time. And until the next time, stay warm.